Hi class, and welcome to this week's lecture. The topic is page layout with CSS, and it's something we started talking about before the break. It's really just a continuation today. Previously we just saw some of the basic terminology related to multi-column layout designs with CSS. And we are going to investigate today how CSS-based web design can provide us with some templates that will enable us to build 2, 3, or even multi-column web pages. So what we have seen so far is just the terminology. Over time, there have been several layout approaches that have emerged for web design, and these are the three most popular ones: liquid, fixed, and elastic. The liquid one refers to pages that resize as the browser window is resized. The fixed one refers to pages that put the content in a page area that stays at a specific pixel width regardless of the browser window's dimensions. And the last one, the elastic one, refers to creating pages that have page areas that get larger or smaller when the text is resized. Sort of a zooming effect, if you will. A major layout concern is the optimal line length. So line length is defined, as you can see here, as a measure of the number of words or characters in a line of text. A general rule is that the optimal line length is about 10 to 12 words, or between 60 and 75 characters. When line lengths grow too long, the text becomes more difficult to read. And not only is it hard to focus long enough to get to the end of a long line, but it also requires extra effort on the user's part to find the beginning of the next line again. And you may also need some nasty horizontal scrolling, which is why line length is so important. It has been, as you can see here, at the heart of the debate over which layout technique is superior, the liquid layouts, the fixed width designs, or the elastic ones. With liquid layouts, line lengths might get too long when the browser is sized very wide. With the fixed width designs, the line lengths may become awkwardly short if the text is sized large within narrow and rigid column widths. And with the elastic layout, it does offer predictable line lengths even when the text is sized larger, which quite often makes it a popular option for balancing design and accessibility priorities. Liquid page design, we should note here that web pages by default are liquid, which means that the behavior of the normal flow of HTML markup is to flow into the browser window, filling all available space. If the browser window is resized, the elements reflow to adapt it to the new size. However, many designers make a conscious decision and actually specify via CSS that the web page is liquid. Liquid page layouts, or also referred to as fluid layouts, follow the default behavior of the normal flow as HTML elements are laid out onto the page. In other words, the page area and or the columns within the page are allowed to get wider or narrower to fill the available space in the browser window. There's really no attempt to control the width of the content. The text is permitted to reflow as required. What you see here on the next slide is an example of a full-size window and a resized version of that window. So this is an example of a fluid or a liquid layout. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of liquid layouts? For the advantages, let's see, go ahead and list some of those here. You don't have to design for a specific screen resolution. So no specific resolution required. You avoid potentially awkward empty space because the text fills the window. No empty space. And liquid pages keep with the spirit and nature of the medium, so they look natural. Now, what are some of the disadvantages of liquid or fluid designs? Okay. With large screens, line lengths can get very long and uncomfortable to read. So line length is a potential problem here, and they're also less predictable. Elements may be too spread out or too cramped at extreme browser dimensions, so they are less predictable. Okay. All right. How do we create liquid layouts? A liquid layout, as you can see here in the notes, is normally created by specifying widths in percentage or EM values. In other words, relative measures. Often, as we will see later, a container div, usually named content, container, wrapper, or page, is used to hold any header, columns, and footer of the web page, and the majority of these components have percentage widths, and thus adjust to the user's screen resolution. While some designers may give set that is fixed widths to certain components in liquid layouts, such as the margins, for example, the layout in general uses percentage widths so that the view is adjusted for each user. Okay. Here is an example of a liquid layout. And the first one we see is a two-column layout. The columns are each encapsulated within their own div elements, and the width of each div has been specified as a percentage of the available browser window width. So the first column will always be will always occupy 70% of the real estate taken up by the browser. The second one will always take up 25%, regardless of how big that browser window is. You resize it, the first column takes up the same percentage, the second column as well. How do we do this in the CSS part of the coding? As you can see here, we set up the main column to have a width of 70%. We set up the margin right at 5%. This thing here is needed to create some breathing space between the two columns, and it's one way to do that. Without it, the text could become cramped. There really isn't going to be any space between the two columns, and it may get uncomfortable for the user to read the text. It is important that we float the main to the left if we want it to be on the left. We also have the background. And then you can see the extras column, which is defined underneath it to have a width of 25%. And it's also floated to the left so that it can stack next to the main column. When you float everything to the left, your containers are going to stack horizontally instead of vertically, going from left to right. The important thing to notice in this part of the code here is that when you add up the margins and the content area widths, 70 plus 5 plus 25, you end up with 100%. Okay. All right, and this is precisely what I just mentioned a moment ago. The main column will always stay set at 70%, and the right column will always be 25%. The other 5% being used for the breathing space, regardless of the window size. Let's look at another example. An alternative is to not specify the width at all for one of the columns, in which case its width will fill the available width of the browser window via the default auto setting of the browser. I guess you can call this a combination of liquid and fixed layouts. So in this example that you see here on this line, the right column does not have a specified width. It's going to be resized automatically by the browser, and it will always fill up the browser window as you can see here in the example. Okay. How do we accomplish this in CSS? The first part, we set the main column to have an absolute position. There's no width specified for this column. This is the liquid part. Width will move in and out as necessary, positioned in browser window to leave room for the extras column. The extras column has a width of 200 pixels and its position is absolute. The fixed part is implemented with this part of the coding here. This is where the width is specified and the position. And this column will always stay this width. Like the main column, this column is positioned absolutely. So it has an absolute position. Okay. And visually, this is what we have accomplished with the CSS that we just saw. Okay, now let's take a look at fixed layouts. The fixed width layouts, as the name implies, stay put at a specified pixel width determined by the web designer. The layout does not stretch to fill the browser window, but remains at its set width, whatever you do to the size of the browser window. A fixed website layout has a wrapper that is fixed width, and the components inside it have fixed widths. The important thing is that the container or the wrapper element is set to not move. No matter what the screen resolution the visitor has, he or she will see the same width as all the other visitors. Visually, it could look like this. Here's one quick example. Assuming a width of 960 pixels, which is okay if most website users are assumed to browse in a 1024 by 768 resolution or higher. One of the main concerns, by the way, with using fixed width layout is that if the user's browser window is not as wide as the page, the content on the right edge of the page will not be visible. Although it is possible to scroll horizontally, it may not always be clear that there is more content there in the first place. And by having a predetermined width for the whole layout and its columns, the designer can be certain that window width and screen resolution will not compromise his or her design, specifically with regard to carefully measured internal elements such as the banners, images, and carefully positioned text. On the downside, this means that whatever width you declare for your whole design, this will be the width that will be served to all the browser users. A 780 pixel width design might look great with an 800 by 600 screen resolution, but it starts to look a bit dwarfed with a modern 1280 by 1024 screen resolution. Okay, now with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of fixed width layouts. For the advantages, the layout is predictable, so predictability is one of the advantages. This approach offers better control over line length. And we should probably also list here the fact that fashions do come and go. However, many well-known web designers are using fixed width designs. So an approach of choice for many established web designers. As for the disadvantages, content on the right edge will be hidden if the browser window is smaller than the page, so potentially hidden content. Text elements still reflow if the user resizes the font size, so it does not guarantee that the layout will stay exactly the same. Text elements still reflow. And line lengths may grow awkwardly short at very large text sizes. Awkward lines are all possible disadvantages of this approach. Okay, a quick visual example. Here we can see an implementation of a fixed width layout. Once the window is resized, part of the web page disappears, becomes hidden. It's still there, but the user doesn't really see it, and it looks like it has gone away. Okay. Now, this is a good place for us to take a break, so I'm gonna stop the presentation and continue in a few moments. Thanks for watching. See you in a few moments.